Twilight Saga, Book 1. Summary. Great, Nana, headstrong, sun loving, 17 years old Bella declines her mom's invitation to move to Florida and instead reluctantly to move to her dad's cabin in the dreary, rainy town of Forks, Washington. She becomes introduced to Edward Cullen and a distant, stylish, and disarming handsome senior who is also a vampire. When he reveals that his specific clone hunts wildlife instead of humans, Bella deduces that she is safe from his blood sucking instincts and therefore free to fall hopelessly in love with him. The feeling is mutual, and the resulting violent romance as they attempt to hide Edward's identity from her family and the rest of the school. Murray adds an eerie new twist to the mismatched, star-crossed lovers theme. Predator falls for prey, human falls for vampire. This tension strips away any persistence readers may have about the everyday teen romance novel, and kissing and touching and talking take on an entirely new meaning when one small mistake could be the life threatening. Bella and Edward's struggle to make their relationship work becomes a struggle for survival, especially when vampires from an outside clone inflate the Cullen territory and the head straight for her. As a result, the novel's danger factor skyrockets as the excitement for secret love and hushed affection morphs into a terrifying race to stay alive. Twilight Saga, Book 1, Chapter 1, First Sight. Preface. I could never given much thought to how I could die, though I had reasons enough in the last few months. But even if I had, I could not have imagined it like this. I started without breathing across the long room into the dark eyes of the hunter, and he looked pleasantly back at me. Surely it was a good way to die, in the place of someone else, someone I loved. No believing that thought to count for something. I know that if I could never gone to folks, I could have been facing death. I could not be facing death now. But terrified as I was, I could not bring myself to regret the decision. When life offers you a dream so far beyond any of your expectations, it is not reasonable to grieve when it comes to an end. The hunter smiled in a friendly way as he centered forward to kill me. My mother drove me to the airport. The windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless, white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. In the Olympic Peninsula of northwest Washington state, a small town named Forks existed under a near constant cover of clouds. It rains as is this constitutional town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, ominous shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only a few months old. It was in this town that I could be compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, my dad, Charlie, vacationated with me in California for 2 weeks instead. It was to folks that I now exile myself, an action that I took without with great horror. I detested folks. I loved Phoenix. I loved the sun and the blistering heat. I loved the grievous, sprawling city. Bella, my mom said to me the last of the 1,000 times before I got to the plane. You don't have to do this. My mom looks like me, except with short hair and love lines. I felt a spasm of panic as I stared at her wide, childlike eye. How could I leave my loving, erratic, hair-brained mother to fend for herself? Of course, she had Phil now, so the bills could probably be get paid. There could be food in the refrigerator, gas in the car, and someone to call when she got lost. But still, I want to go, I lied. I could always be a bad liar, but I could not be saying this lie so frequently lately that it sounded most convincing now. Tell Charlie I said hi. I will. I will see you soon, she insisted. You can come home whenever you want. I will come right back as soon as you need me. But I could see the sacrifice in her eyes behind the promise. Don't worry about me, I argued. It will be great. I love you, Mom. She hugged me tightly for a minute, and then I got to the plane and she was gone. It is 4 hours flight from Phoenix to Seattle. Another hour in a small plane up to the Port Angels, and then an hard drive back down to Forks. Flying does not bother me. The hour in the car with Charlie, though, I was a little worried about. Charlie had really been fairly nice about the whole thing. He seems genuinely pleased that I was coming to live with him for the first 20th any degree of preference. He got already gotten me registered for high school and was going to help me get a car. But it was sure to be awkward with Charlie. Neither of us was what anyone could call verbose, and I don't know what there was to say regardless. I know he was more than a little confused by my decision, like my mother before me. I had not made a secret of my distastes for folks. When I landed in Port Angels, it was raining. I don't see it as an omen, just unavoidable. I could already said my goodbyes to the sun. Charlie was waiting for me with a cursor. This I was expecting too. Charlie is police chef, sworn to the good people of folks. My primary motivation behind buying a car, despite the scarcity of my funds, was that I refused to be driven around town in a car with red and blue lights on top. Nothing slows down traffic like a cop. Charlie gave me an awkward one armed hug when I stumbled my way off the plane. It's good to see you, Bills, he said, smiling as he automatically caught and steadied me. We have not changed much. How's Ren? Mom is fine. It's good to see you too, Dad. I was not allowed to call him Charlie to his face. I had only a few bags. Most of my clothes were too premium for Washington. My mom and I had pooled our resources to supplement my winter wardrobe, but it was still scanty. It all fit easily into the trunk of the cruiser. I found a good car for you. Really cheap, he announced when he were trapped in. What kind of car? I suspectly of the way he said, good car for you, as opposed to just good car. Well, it's a truck actually, a cabby. Where did you find it? Do you remember Billy back down La Push? La Push is the tiny Indian reservation of the coast. No, he used to go fishing with us during the summer, Charlie prompted. That could explain why I don't remember him. I do a good job of blocking painful, unnecessary things from my memory. He's in a wheelchair now, Charlie continued when I don't respond. So he cannot drive anymore, and he offered to sell me his truck cheap. What year it is? I could see from his change of expression that this was the question he was hoping I could not ask. Well, Billy's done a lot of work on the engine. It is only a few years old, really. I hoped he don't think so little of me as to believe I could give up that easily. When did he buy it? He bought it in 1984, I think. Did he buy it new? Well, no. I think it was new in the early 60s or late 50s at the earliest, he admitted sheepishly. Dad, I don't really know anything about cars. I could not be able to fix it if anything went wrong, and I could not afford a mechanic. Really, Bella, the thing runs great. They don't build them like that anymore. The thing, I thought to myself. It had possibilities as a nickname. At the very least, how cheap is cheap? After all, that was a part I could not compromise on. Well, honey, I kind of already bought it for you as a homecoming gift. Charlie peeked sideways at me with a hopeful expression. Wow, free. You don't need to do that, Dad. I was going to buy myself a car. I don't mind. I want you to be happy here. He was looking ahead at the road when he said this. Charlie was not comfortable with expressing his emotions out loud. I inherited that from him, so I was looking straight headed as I responded. That is really nice, Dad. Thanks. I really appreciate it. No needed to add that my being happy in folks is an impossibility. He don't need to suffer along with me. And I never looked a free truck in the month or engine. Well, now you're welcome. He mumbled, embarrassed by the thanks. We exchanged a few more comments on the weather, which was wet, and that was pretty much in for conversation. We stared out the windows in silence. It was beautiful, of course. I cannot deny that. Everything was green, the trees, their trunks covered with moss, their branches hanging with a canopy of wood, the ground covered with fence. Even the air filtered down greeny through the leaves. It was too green, an alien planet. Eventually, we made it to Charles. He still lived in the small two-bedroom house that he could bought it with my mother in the early days of their marriage. Those were the only kind of days their marriage had, the early ones. There, parked on the street in front of the house that never changed, was my new to me, truck. It was faded red color with big, rounded fenders and a bulbous cab. To my instant surprise, I loved it. I don't know if it could run, but I could see myself in it. Plus, it was one of those solid iron affairs that never gets damaged. The kind you see at the scene of an accident, paint unscratched, surrounded by the piece of the fortune car it had destroyed. Wow, Dad, I love it, thanks. Now my horrific day tomorrow could be just that much less dreadful. I could not be faced with the choice of either walking 2 miles in the rain to school or accepting a ride in the chuff cruiser. I'm glad you like it, Charlie said gruffly, embarrassed again. It took only one trip to get all my stuff upstairs. I got the west bedroom that faced out over the front yard. The room was familiar. It had been belonged to me since I was born. The wooden floor, the light blue walls, the peaked ceilings, the yellow lace curtains around the window. These were all a part of my childhood. The only change Charlie had ever made was switching the crib for a bed and adding a desk as I grew. The desk now held a second-hand computer with a phone line of the modern staple along the floor to the nearest phone jack. This was a stipulation from my mother so that we could stay in touch easily. The rocking chair from my baby days was still in the corner. There was only one small bathroom at the top of the stairs, which I could have to share with Charlie. I was trying not to dwell too much on that fact. One of the best things about Charlie is he does not hover. He left me alone to unpack and get settled, a feat that could have been altogether impossible for my mother. It was nice to be alone, not to have to smile and look pleased, a relief to stare dejectedly out of the window at the sheeting rain, and let just a few tears escape. I was not in the mood to go on the real crying jack. I could save that for the bedtime, when I could have to think about the coming morning. Folks High School had a frightening total of only 357, now 58 students. There were more than 700 people in my junior class alone back home. All of the kids here had grown up together. Their grandparents had been tutelars together. I could be the new girl from the big city, a curiosity, a freak. Maybe if I looked like a girl from Phoenix should, I could work this Tommy advantage. But physically, I could never fit in anywhere. I should be tan, spotty, blonde, a volleyball player. or a cheerleader, perhaps, all the things that go with the living in the valley of the sun. Instead, I was ivory skinned, without even the excuse of the blue eyes or red hair. Despite the constant sunshine, I had always been slender, but soft somehow, obvious, not an athletic. I don't have the necessary hand eye coordination to play sports without humiliating myself and harming both myself and anyone else who stood too close. When I finished putting my clothes in the old pine dresser, I took my bag of bathroom necessities and went to the communal bathroom to clean myself up after the day of travel. I looked at my face in the mirror as I brushed through my tangled, damp hair. Maybe it was the light, but already I looked swallower unhealthy. My skin could be pretty. It was very clear, almost transparent looking, but it all depended on color. I had no color here. Facing my pale reaction reflection in the mirror, I was forced to admit that I was lying to myself. I was not just physically that I could never fit it. And if I could not find a nicey in a school with 3,000 people, and what we are any chance here? I don't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was that I don't relate well to people. Period. Even my mother, who I was closer to than anyone else on the planet, was never in harmony with me, never on exactly the same pitch. Sometimes I wonder if I was seeing the same things though my eyes that the rest of the world was seeing through theirs. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain, but the cause don't matter. All that mattered was the effect, and tomorrow could be just the beginning. I don't sleep well that night. Even after I was done crying, the constant whooshing of the rain and the wind across the roof could not fade into the background. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and later added the pillow too, but I could not fall asleep until after midnight when the rain finally settled into a quieter drizzle. Thick fog was all I could see out of my window in the morning, and I could feel the claustrophobic creeping up on me. You could never see the sky here. It was like a cage. Breakfast with Charlie was quite even. He wished me good luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me. Charlie left first, off to the police station. That was his wife and family. After he left, I sat the old square oak table in one of the three unmatching chairs and examined his small kitchen with its dark panel walls, bright yellow cabinets, and a white linen floor. Nothing was changed. My mother had painted the cabins 18 years ago in an attempt to bring some sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace in the adjacent handkerchief sized family room was a now of pictures. First, a wedding picture of a Charlie and my mom in West Angels in Las Vegas. Then, one of the three of us in the hospital after I was born, taken by a helpful nurse, followed by the president of my school picture up to the last years. Those were embarrassing to look at. I could have to see what I could do to get Charlie to put them somewhere else, at least while I was living here. It was impossible, being in the house, not to realize that Charlie had never gotten over my mom. It had made me uncomfortable. I don't want to be too early to school, but I could not stay in the house anymore. I am done my jacket, which had the feel of a biohazard suit, and headed out to the rain. It was just drizzling still, not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was always hidden under the eaves by the door and locked up. The slouching of my new waterproof boots was unnerving. I missed the normal crunch of gravels as I walked. I could not pass and admire my truck again as I wanted. I was in a hurry to get out of the misty wet that swirled around my head and clung to my hair under my hood. Inside the truck, it was nice and dry. Either Billy or Charlie had obviously cleaned it up, but the tan up Upholstered seats still smelled faintly of tobacco, gasoline, and peppermint. The engine started quickly, to my relief, but loudly, roaring to life, and then idling at top volume. Well, a truck this old was bound to have a flaw. The antique radio worked, a plus that I had not expected. Finding the school was not difficult, though I could never been there before. The school was like most other things, just off the highway. It was not obvious that it was a school, only the sign, which declared it to be the Folks High School, made me stop. It looked like a collection of matching houses built with maroon colored bricks. There were so many trees and shrubs I could not sight its sides at first. There, where was the feel of the institution? I wondered. Where were the chain link fences, the metal detectors? I parked in front of the first building, which had a small sign over the door reading front office. No one else was parked there, so I was sure I was off limits. But I decided I could get direction insights instead of circling around in the rain like an idiot. I stepped unwillingly out of the toasty truck cab and walked down a little stone path lined with the dark hedges. I looked. I took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside, it was brightly lit and warmer than I hoped. The office was a little waiting area with painted folding chairs, orange flicked commercial carpet, notices, and awards culturing the walls. A big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in the large plastic plots, as if there was not enough greeny outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter cluttered with wire baskets full of papers and brightly colored flyers tapped onto its front. There were three desks behind the counter, one of which was manned by a large had red-haired woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel overdressed. The red-haired woman looked up. Can I help you? I'm Isabella Swan, I informed her, and saw the immediate awareness her eyes. I was expected a topic of gossip, no doubt. Daughter of the chief flight ex-wife, come home at last. Of course, she said. She dug through a preciously scabbed pile of documents on her desk till she found the ones she was looking for. I have your schedules right here and a map for the school. She brought several sheets to the counter to show Roe. She went through my classes for me, highlights the best route to each of the map, and gave me a slip to have each teacher sign, which I was to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled at me and hoped, like Charlie, that I could like it here in Fuchs. I smiled back, as convincing as I could. When I went back out to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I dove around the school, following the line to traffic. I was glad to see that most of the cars were older like mine, nothing flashy. At home, I could live in one of the few lower income neighborhoods that were included in the Paradise Valley district. It was a common thing to see a new Mercedes or Porsche in the student lot. The nicest car here was shiny Volvo, and it stood out. Still, I cut the engine as soon as I was on the spot, so that the other Thunder's volumes could not draw attention to me. I looked at the map in the trunk, trying to memorize it now. Hopefully, I could not have to walk around with it stuck in the front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung the strap over my shoulder, and sucked in a huge breath. I can do this, I lied to myself feebly. No one was going to bite me. I finally exhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked to the sidewalk, crowded with teenagers. My plan bag, jacket, don't stand out, I noticed with relief. Once I got round the cafeteria building that was easy to spot. Your larger bag 3 was painted on a white square on the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creeping towards hypernativity as I approached the door. I tried holding my breath as I followed two unisex rain coasters through the door. The classroom was small. The people in front of me stopped just inside the door to hang up their coasters. There as long row of hooks. I copied them. There were two girls, one a Procline color blend, the other also pale, with light brown hair. At least my skin could not be a standout here. I took the sip up to the teacher, a tall, blanding man whose desk had a nameplate identifying him as a Mr. Mansell. He gawked at me when he saw my name. Not an encouraging response, and of course I flashed tomato red. But at least he sent me to an empty desk at the back without introducing me to the class. It was harder for my new classmates to stare at me in the back. But somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list in the teacher had given me. It was fairly basic. Bronte, Shakespeare, Chaucer, Flocran. I have already read everything. That was comforting and boring. I wonder if my mom could send me my folder of old essays, or if she could think that was cheating. I went through different arguments with her in my head while the teacher droned on. When the bell rang, a nasal buzzing sound, a cranky boy with skin problems and hair back as an oil silk lender crossed the aisle to talk to me. You're Isabella's fan, or not you? He looked like the overly helpful chess club type. Bella, I corrected. Everyone within 3 set radius turned to look at me. Where is your next class? He asked. I had to check in my bag. Garment with Jeffron in building 6. There was nowhere to look without meeting curious eyes. I'm headed towards building 4. I could show you the way. Definitely over helpful. I'm Eric, he added. I smiled tentatively. Thanks. We got our jackets and headed out in the rain, which he picked up. I could have sworn several people behind us were walking close enough to ears over drop. I hoped I was not getting paranoid. So, this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh? He asked. Very. It does not rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year? Wow, what must that be like? He wondered. Sunny, I told him. You don't look very tan. My mother is part albino. He studied my face apprehensively and assigned it looked like clouds and a sense of humor don't mix. A few months of this and I could forget how to use scarum. We walked back another around the cafeteria to the south building by the gym. Eric walked me right to the door, though it was clearly marked. Well, good luck, he said as I touched the handle. Maybe we will have some other classes together. He sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Mr. Vanner, who I could have hated anyway, just because of the subject he thought was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduced myself. I stamped, blushed, and ripped over my own boots on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started to recognize several of the faces in each class. There were always someone braver than the others who could introduce themselves and ask me questions about how I was liking folks. I tried to be diplomatic, but mostly I just lied a lot. At least I never needed the map. Oh, one girl sat next to me in the bold trigonometry and Spanish, and she walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, several inches shorter than my 5'4" but her wildly curly dark hair made up a lot of the differences between our heights. I could not remember her name, so I smiled and nodded as she pattered about teachers and classes. I don't try to keep up. We sat at the end of the full table with several of her friends, who she introduced to me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. They seemed impressed by her bravery in speaking to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved at me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with seven curious strangers that I first saw them. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away from where I sat as possible in the long room. There were five of them. They were not talking, and they were not eating, though they each had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They were not gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare at them without fear of meeting an exclusively instead of pair of eyes. Excessively instead of pair of, but it was one of these things that caught and held my attention. They don't look anything alike. Of the three boys, one was big muzzled, like a serious weightlifter with dark curly hair. Another was taller, leaner, but still muscular and honey blend. That was the last was lanky, less bully, with untied browsed color hat. He was more boyish than the others, who looked like they could be in college or even teachers here rather than students. The girls were opposites. The tall one was Stiatus. She was a beautiful figure, the kind you saw on the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues, the kind that made every girl around her take a hit on her self esteem just by being in the safe room. Her hair was golden, gently waving in the middle of her back. The short girl was pixie like, thin in the extreme, with small features. Her hair was a deep black, cropped short, and pointing in every direction. And yet, they were all exactly alike. Every one of them was chalky pale, the palest of all the students living in the sunless town, paler than me, the albino. They all had very dark eyes, despite the range in their hair tones. They also had dark shadows under those eyes, perish, berries like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night or almost done recovering from the broken nose. Though their nose, all their features were straight, perfect, angular. But all this is not why I could not look away. I stared because of their faces, so different, so similar, were all devastating, inhumanly beautiful. They were faces you never expected to see, except perhaps on the airbrushed pages of the fashion magazine, or painted by an old master as the face of an angel. It was hard to decide who was most beautiful. Maybe the perfect blender or the brazen haired boy? They were all looking away, away from each other, away from the other students, away from anything in particular, as far as I could tell. As I watched, the small girl rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbite an apple, and walked away with a quick, graceful look that belonged on a runway. I watched, amazed at her lithe dancer step, till she dumped her tray and glid through the back door. Faster than I could have thought possible, my eyes jetted back to the others who sat unchanging. Who are they? I asked the girl from my Spanish class, whose name I could forgotten, as they looked up to see who I met, though already knowing probably from my tone. Suddenly he looked at her, the thinner one, the boyish one, the youngest, perhaps. He looked at my neighbor for just a fraction of seconds, and then his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could. Thought in a flush of embarrassment, I dropped my eyes at once. In the brief flash of glance, his face held nothing of interest. It was as if she had called his name, and he looked up in the involuntary response, already having decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table like I did. That is Edward and Emmett Cullen and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. She said this under her breath. I glanced sideways at the beautiful boy who was looking at his tray now, picking a bangle to pieces with long, pale fingers. His mouth was moving very quickly, his perfect lips barely opening. The other three still looked away, and yet I felt he was speaking quietly to them. Strange. Unpopular names, I thought. The kinds of names grandparents had. But maybe that was in Vogue, small town names. I finally remembered that my neighbor was called Jessica, a perfectly common name. There was two girls named Jessica in my history class back home. They are very nice looking. I struggled with a conscious understanding. Yes, Jessie agreed with another giggle. They are all together though, Emmett and Rosalie and Jasper and Alice, I mean. And they live together. Her voice held all the shock and contaminant of the small town, I thought critically. But if I was being honest, I had to admit that even in Phoenix, it could cause gossip. Which one are the Cullens? I asked. They don't look related. Oh, they are not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s or early 30s. They are all adopted. The Hayes or the brother and sister twins, the Blends, and they are foster children. They look a little old for foster children. They are now. Jasper and Rosalie are both 18, but they have been with Mr. Cullen since they were 8. She is their aunt or something like that. That is really kind of nice for them to take care of all those kids like that when they are so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly, and I got the impression that she don't like the doctor and his wife for some reason. With the glance she was throwing at their adopted children, I could presume the reason was jealousy. I think that Mr. Scollins cannot have any kids, though, she added, as if that lessened their kindness. Throughout all this conversation, my eyes flickered again and again to the table where the strange family sat. They continued to look at the walls and not eat. Have they always lived in folks? I asked. Surely I could have noticed them on one of my summers here. No, she said in a voice that implied it should be obvious even to my arrival like me. They just moved down 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. I felt a surge of pity and relief. Pity because, beautiful as they were outsiders, clearly not accepted. Relief that I was not the only newcomer here, and certainly not the most interesting by any standard. As I examined them, the youngest one of the Kullans looked up and met my gaze, this time with evident curiosity in his expression. As I looked swiftly away, it seems to me that his glance held some kind of armed expectation. Which one is the boy with the reddish brown hair? I asked. I peeked at him from the corner of my eyes, and he was still staring at me, but not galling like the other students had today. He had a silent, frustrated expression. I looked down again. That is Edward. He's gorgeous, of course, but don't waste your time. He does not date. Apparently, none of the girls here are good looking enough for him. She sniffed, a clear case of sore grapes. I wondered when he could turn her down. I bit my lip to hide my smile, then I glanced at him again. His face was turned away, but I thought his cheek appeared lifted, as if he was smiling too. After a few more minutes, the four of them left the table together. They all were noticeable graceful, even the big bony one. It was unsettled to watch. The one named Edward, don't look at me again. I sat at the table with Jessica and her friends longer than I could have if I could been sitting alone. I was so anxious not to be late for classes on my first day. One of my new acceptants who considerably reminded me that her name was Angela. I had biology 2 with me the next hour. We walked to the class together in silence. She was shy too. When we entered the classroom, Angelina went to sit at a back topped lap table exactly like the ones I used to. She already had a neighbor. In fact, the tables were filled but one. Next to the center aisle, I recognized Edward Cullen by his unusual hair, sitting next to the single open seat. as I walked down the aisle to introduce myself to the teacher and get my slip signed. I was watching him. Just as I passed, he suddenly went rigid in his seat. He started at me again, meeting my eyes with a strange expression on his face. It was hostile, furious. I looked away quickly, shocked. Going red again, I stumbled over a book in the walkway and had to catch myself on the edge of the table. The girl sitting there giggled. I noticed that his eyes were black, coal black. Mr. Banner signed my slip and handed me a book with no nonsense about introductions. I could tell we were going to get along. Of course, he had no choice but to send me to the one open seat in the middle of the room. I kept my eyes down as I went to sit by him, by the anesthetist chair he could given me. I don't look up as I set my book on the table and took my seat, but I was his posture changed from the corner of my eyes. He was leaning away from me, sitting on the extreme edge of his chair and averting his eyes like he smelled something bad. Unconsciously, I sniffed my hair. It smelled like strawberries, the scent of my favorite shampoo. It seemed as innocent enough odor. I let my hair fall over my right shoulder, making a dark curtain between us, and tried to pay attention to the teacher. Unfortunately, the lecture was on cellular anatomy, something I have already studied. I took notes carefully anyway, always looking down. I could not stop myself from peeking occasionally through the screen of my hair at the strange boy next to me. During the whole class, he never relaxed his stiff position on the edge of the chair. Sitting as far as possible, I could see his hand on his left leg, could clenched into a fist, standing out under his pale skin. This, too, he never relaxed. He had the long sleeve of his white shirt pushed up to his elbows, and his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular beneath his light skin. He was not nearly as slight as he looked next to his blurry brother. The class seems to drag on longer than the others. Was it because the day was finally coming to a close, or because I was waiting for his tight fist to loosen? It never did. He continued to sit so still it looked like he was not breathing. What was wrong with him? Was this his normal behavior? I questioned my judgmental on Jessica bitterness at lunch today. Maybe she was not as reasonable as I could thought. It could not have anything to do with me. He don't know me from Eve. I peeked up at him one more time and regretted it. He was glaring down at me again, his black eyes full of revelation. As I flinched away from him, shrinking again from my chair, the phrase, if looks could kill, suddenly ran through my mind. At the moment, the bell rang loudly, making me jump, and Edward Cullen was out of his seat. Fluttily he rose. He was much taller than I could thought, his back to me, and he was out of the door before anyone else was out of their seat. I sat frozen in my seat, staring blankly after him. He was so mean. It was not fair. I began gathering up my things slowly, trying to block the anger that filled me. For fear my eyes could tear up. For some reasons, my temper was hard driver to my tear ducts. I usually cried when I was angry, a humiliating tendency. Are not you Isabella's fan? A male voice asked. I looked up to see a cute baby faced boy, his pale blonde hair carefully gelled into an orderly spike, smiling at me in a friendly way. He obviously don't think I smell bad. Bella, I corrected him with a smile. I'm Mike. Hi, Mike. Do you need any help from finding your next class? I'm headed to gym. Actually, I think I can find it. That is my next class too. He seems thrilled, though it was not that big of a coincidence in a school this small. If we walked to class together, he was a chatter, a slip. He supplied most of this conversation, which made it easy for me. He could lived in California till he was 10, so he knew how I felt about the sun. I turned out he was in my English class also. He was the nicest person I could met today. But as we were entering the gym, he asked, "So, did you stab Edward Cullen with a pencil or what? I have never seen him act like that." A syringe. So, I was not the only one who had noticed, and apparently, that was not Edward Cullen's usual behavior. I decided to play dumb. Was that the boy sat next to in biology? I asked artlessly. Yes, he said. He looked like he was in pain or something. I don't know, I responded. I never spoke to him. He's a weird guy. Mike lingered by me instead of heading the dressing room. If I were lucky enough to sit by you, I could have talked to you. I smiled at him before walking through the glass room door. He was friendly and clearly admiring, but I was not enough to ease my irritation. The gym teacher, Coach Clapp, found me a uniform, but don't make me dress down for today's class at home. Only 2 years of re were required. Here, P was mandatory all 4 years. Folks was literally my personal hell on the earth. Oh. I watched 4 volleyball games running simultaneously, remembering how many injuries I had sustained and infected playing volleyball. I felt faintly nauseated. The final bell rang at last. I walked slowly to the office to return my paperwork. The rain had drifted away, but the wind was strong and colder. I wrapped my arms around myself when I walked into the warm office. I almost turned around and walked back out. Edward Cullen stood at the desk in front of me. I recognized again the thousand's bronze hair. He don't appear to notice the sound of my entrance. I stood, pressed against the back wall, waiting for the receptionist to be free. He was arguing with her in a low, attractive voice. I quickly picked up the fist of the argument. He was trying to trade from sixth hour biology to another time or any other time. I just could not believe that this was about me. It had to be something else, something that had happened before I entered biology room. The look on his face must have been about another aggravation entirely. It was impossible that this stranger could take such a sudden, intense dislike to me. The door opened again, and the cold wind suddenly gusted through the room, rustling the papers off the desk, spilling my hair around my face. The girl who came in merely stepped to the desk, placed a note in the wire basket, and walked out again. But Edward's skull and back stiffened, and he turned slowly to glare at me. His face was absurdly handsome, with praising, hateful eyes. For an instant, I felt a thrill of genuine fear, raising the hair on my arms. The look only lasted a second, but it chilled me more than a freezing wind. He turned back to the receptionist. "Never mind then," he said hesitantly in a voice like velvet. "I can see that it is impossible. Thank you so much for your help." And he turned on his wheel without another look at me and disappeared out the door. I went merely to the desk, my face white for one instead of red, and handed her the signed slip. "How did your first day go, dear?" the receptionist asked maternally. "Fine," I lied. My voice weak. She don't look convinced. When I go to the truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It seems like a heaven, already the closest thing to home I had in this damn green hole. I sat inside for a while, just staring out the windshield blankly, but soon I was cold enough to need the heater, so I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I headed back to Charlie's house, fighting tears the whole way there.